Are you tired of being told what to think and how to act? Well, you are not alone. In case you haven't realized it, you have an internal GPS. It knows all you need to know about how to live your life. So it's about time you stopped letting the media and the government tell you what is true for you. In fact, it is exactly that time. It's time to think for yourself. And here to make sure you're doing just that is your host, mediator, author, and lawyer, Carole Gold.
Hi, it's Monday, January 31st. I'm Carole Gold, and welcome to Think for Yourself. I want to spend time talking about experts because I think that we have become overly dependent, overly reliant, and overly confident in what we hear from, and I'm going to put in air quotes, supposed experts. It's really easy to look at what happened with COVID and Dr. Anthony Fauci and know that an entire nation, or at least a majority of the population of an entire nation, could unquestionably rely upon his expertise. But I was reading a 2014 Forbes article that had the following line in it. One of the things that makes experts so convincing is that they exude confidence. If I were to choose my own word to replace confidence in that quote, I'd choose certainty. One of the reasons or one of the things that makes experts so convincing is that they exude certainty. And I've spoken of certainty in the past when I've talked about the power of certainty, and I've used as an example Islamic extremists, Islamic terrorists. I like to say that they are insane, but they are certain in their insanity, which makes them certainly insane. They are certain in their insanity because what they believe with unwavering certainty, and they communicate that. And I think that's how they radicalize so easily, because people who are looking for something absolute to hold on to believe in, to trust, are easily drawn to certainty in another. However, it's not just in politics, it's not just COVID. There are historical examples, there are medical examples in the medical industry. And I want to go over some of these because I think it makes a really important point about where we should be looking for expertise. In 1798, there were 1 billion people on the earth. And Thomas Malthus, who was an economist, said that overpopulation was going to lead to famine and war globally. Well, by 1968, the population was 4 billion on the earth. Yet Paul Ehrlich, who at the time was a Stanford professor and who was a darling of the political left, wrote a book called The Population Bomb. And in it, he predicted the same thing that Malthus predicted in 1798. Well, in 2014, we had over 7 billion people on the earth. And yet poverty and violence, they were both at an all-time low. And in fact, carbon emissions were beginning to reduce in 2014. So there's an example in terms of society, or predictions about society, predictions actually about the population of the earth and what it would confront, were incredibly wrong, starting back at 1798 and going all the way through a Stanford professor who to this day is still revered by the left. But it's also in the medical industry. There is a history in the medical industry, and I think this is what we need to focus on right now. A history in the medical industry of them getting it wrong. So let me start with something that many people may know because they know the family name. The Kennedys, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, President of the United States, who was assassinated. His father, Joseph Kennedy, and his wife, Rose, I think had like 8 or 9 children. One of them was Rosemary Kennedy. She was deprived of sufficient oxygen at birth through just the birthing process. And so she exhibited mental illness throughout her life. And as she became a young adult, some of that became aggressive. Well, her father, in order to deal with that, contacted a doctor named Walter Freeman. Walter Freeman was known for his, quote, ice pick lobotomies. It was completely to lobotomize the front portion of the human brain. He was using that procedure from 1937 to 1967. He lobotomized over 3,500 individuals. He had a 14% fatality rate, and the remainder of those who were lobotomized were either crippled or put in a vegetative state for life. There's more. More doctors smoke Camel cigarettes than any other cigarette. That was an ad that ran in this country for decades. U.S. doctors and Big Tobacco worked in tandem. In fact, Big Tobacco paid doctors, specifically throat doctors, doctors who specialized in throat illnesses and throat diseases, to recommend that their patients and others smoke Camels to help relax the larynx and other benefits of smoking. I myself was a child born with an enlarged thalamus gland. At the time that I was born, the accepted medical procedure for dealing with, or medical treatment for dealing with an enlarged thalamus, which was believed to be a precursor or a cause of SIDS, sudden infant death syndrome, was to use X-ray radiation on the thalamus to allegedly shrink it. Well, I'm one of the lucky ones, because many of those babies who were subjected to that level of radiation, which was the equivalent of 10 CT scans of radiation today, developed cancer of the thyroid, developed leukemia. Many died from the long-term effects of that much radiation exposure. While thank God I've never had cancer of the thyroid, I've had a thyroid condition my entire adult life and live on thyroid medication. I'm certain it comes from the radiation I was exposed to. Again, a scientifically approved and promoted procedure at the time. In 1999, Vioxx, a drug Vioxx, was approved by the FDA. 60,000 people died from that drug. It was produced by Merck, and it was later determined that Merck concealed data of the high incidence of heart attack and stroke from Vioxx. Now, the reason this one is so important is because Merck is who has just released, through FDA approval in December, the antiviral drug molnupiravir to deal with COVID. Now, molnupiravir, and it's a tough word to pronounce, is approved. It's something like $70 a pill, $80 a pill. It's very similar, almost identical in its pharmacologic composition to ivermectin, which is pennies a pill. Why in the world has the FDA approved, through Merck, a company that has a history of litigation, a history of concealing data that killed 60,000 Americans, why would they approve a quickly developed antiviral, allegedly antiviral, when ivermectin, which has been around for 50 years and is one of the safest drugs on the planet, used routinely in countries around the world, is prohibited? And to that end, Japan's pharmaceutical company Kowa has just released information that they've determined that ivermectin has antiviral properties, and they are using it to treat COVID, particularly Omicron, in Japan. So, let's get back to experts. We humans have a tendency to doubt ourselves and trust others who exhibit what I started out on this podcast talking about, which is confidence or certainty. It's a dangerous vulnerability that we have to doubt ourselves, because when we doubt ourselves, what we're really doubting is our own connection to source, our own connection to that place where all information is available to everyone and anyone who goes in search of it. You know, there are stories throughout science where individual scientists refuse to jump on the bandwagon of the accepted theories of the day and went off on their own, only to ultimately turn all those theories upside down and have science do a 180 on a particular approach to a particular scientific problem. That's because the one who goes rogue thinks for themselves. The one who goes rogue has confidence, I'll even say has certainty, in their ability to reason out for themselves what does and does not make sense. And the collective narrative, the approved narrative, often doesn't make sense when you begin to pick it apart. I think that's what's happened with Joe Rogan, right? He has had experts on who are highly respected in their field, who have shown the let's call them the holes, the inconsistency, the weaknesses in the vaccine-only approach to COVID. The reason that this is important, COVID in many respects is now behind us. The worst of it is behind us. But that tendency that we have to listen to experts is about to rear its ugly head again. Why? Because we're going to have an economic crash soon. We're going to run into a U.S. and global economic crisis. And when we do, the experts will jump up and down, just like Anthony Fauci, and they will say, listen to me, follow us, we have the solution. Those same people, the federal government in our country, for example, FEMA, when Katrina hit New Orleans, told everyone to go to, I think it was Rob Roy Stadium. That's where they were to go for safety, to avoid the flooding, to get basic needs met, food, water, access to laboratories. But what happened in Rob Roy Stadium, and again, I'm not 100% sure that's the name of the stadium, but the principle is the same regardless of the name. They were all directed to a centralized location. There was no food, there was inadequate water, there was violence, there wasn't proper security, there was rape in the laboratories that occurred. It was the wrong place to go. And when people got there, they had as much, if not more, to deal with than just fighting the effects of flooding and the hurricane. However, there were people, and I've spoken of this in the past, there were people who did not listen and did not go where the quote experts told them to go. Those people went in other directions. Many of them drove to Texas, where, as I again have said in the past, charitable organizations made facilities and food and water available, even for some people for long periods of time. There were even Texans who took Louisianans into their homes for months after Katrina to allow people to recover. Be very suspicious, but be very thoughtful at the same time, meaning think for yourself, reason out whether or not listening to the experts is in your best interest. Because I'm fairly confident saying that when enough time has passed, like Vioxx, like radiation therapy for an enlarged thalamus, like frontal lobotomies, it will be determined that those therapeutics and those alternate scientific and medical recommendations for treating COVID other than vaccine only will turn out to have had a great deal of truth in them. And in the long run, it will turn out that the damage the vaccine did to many people was way beyond what anyone anticipated, except perhaps the pharmaceutical companies who hid data, who hid the knowledge they had about the harmful effects of the vaccine, the side effects, the adverse effects. You know, at this very moment, both Pfizer and the FDA have joined together in an attempt to take an appeal from a court order that has mandated that Pfizer produce 50,000 pages a month over the next several months, which would disclose everything they knew in the research and trial phases of the vaccine. Why is it that Pfizer and the FDA have joined forces to prevent that information from being made public? I've said it before and I'll say it again. There is no expert on the planet more qualified than you to determine what is in your best interest. That doesn't mean you don't have to gather information. It doesn't mean you don't have to analyze data to some extent. But it does mean you need to take personal responsibility for making your own decisions and abiding and living by the consequences of those decisions, because that's what free will is. And speaking of free will, this morning, I listened to a quote from the author of a book called Homo Deus, A Brief History of Tomorrow. I've read that book. It's interesting. At times it's frightening. The author is a darling now of the Davos elite. He is acting as a consultant for their planning for our global future. Here's the quote. Humans are hackable. Free will is an illusion. What he's talking about are the algorithms that all of us have become reliant upon and how those algorithms are manipulating us and moving us in a certain direction. Those algorithms and social media and the tech giants are moving us as surely as those who moved those people into the stadium after Katrina. It's where they want us to go. It doesn't mean that it's in our highest and best interest. Again, what is in my highest and best interest, what is in your highest and best interest, is best determined as between you and your creator, as between you and the source of all information. You have everything you need to make every decision you need to make in your life at the moment at which you need to make it. Hold on to that power. Don't abdicate it. Whether it's to FEMA, or it's to Google, or it's to the federal government, or it's to Davos. Don't abdicate that which is your birthright. Autonomy, personal freedom, free will, and the uniqueness that is you. And above all else, your connection to the source of all knowledge and wisdom. Thanks for listening. I'm Carole Gold, and I'll be back here again on Wednesday. Until I am, think for yourself.
Carole thanks you for spending your valuable time with her. It is her mission to empower you to remember how smart and capable you are. Be sure to check out Carole's website, carolegold.com. That's Carole with an E, gold.com. Please leave a review and subscribe here so you'll be alerted to Carole's next podcast. Until then, above all else, remember, it's time to think for yourself.